2 days after graduation, Jamie and Peter found themselves rolling down the highway in Peter's '85 Coupe de Ville. The windows were down and country music blasted from the speakers as they danced in the warm summer air. Jamie's hair seemed to fill the car as she sang along, trying to outdo Tim McGraw and impress an already infatuated Peter. He'd promised her a trip across the country as soon as they got their diplomas, and as they crossed the line between Ohio and Indiana, he knew it was going to be magical. They'd met at an on-campus party as sophomores, and he found it impossible to take his eyes off her. They clicked on every level two people possibly could, and within weeks, all their friends knew not to expect one without the other. The idea for the trip came when Jamie said she'd never been out of her home state, growing up in Mount Vernon and attending the Ohio State University. Being from California and having traveled to most of the lower 48 states as a kid, he couldn't let that slide. The promise of adventure kept her going, even on the hardest days, and especially leading up to finals where she very nearly quit altogether. As the warm sun beat down on the hood of the car, he reached over and grabbed her hand, raising his voice to match hers for the last few bars of the song. They'd managed to make it to St. Louis as the sun neared the horizon on the first day, and a romantic dinner under the world-famous arch was the perfect cap on the beginning of their trip. The first week or so went relatively smooth. They found themselves in the Rocky Mountains, camping out under the stars and looking up at snowy peaks. They both loved hiking, and the goal was to hit as many trails as they possibly could. A flat tire to start week 2 signaled what was to come, though, as they seemed to hit dozens of small issues. Jamie lost one of her hiking boots, a rock falling from one of the cliffs along the highway led to a cracked windshield, and Peter twisted his ankle walking back to the car at a rest stop. They tried to stay as calm as possible through the trials, but a couple of misconstrued words led to an argument as they tried to find one of their planned stops late one night. There had been an overlook that Peter had visited as a kid, and he wanted to show it to Jamie. He'd planned to arrive just before sunset, making for a special start to the evening, but traffic and other small issues had slowed them down, and at that point he just wanted to find it out of principle. Jamie was crying, saying she just wanted to go home, and Peter was getting more frustrated by the minute. As they rounded a surprisingly sharp corner, the power steering failed and the car careened over the edge of the road as Peter lost control. Waking up in the hospital, Jamie barely remembered how she got there. Her mother and father were at her bedside, sleeping in chairs that looked very uncomfortable, and a breathing tube was down her throat. Flashes of the crash flitted through her mind, but her memory blocked out the worst parts. An older man who'd been following them when they crashed had called it in, and emergency crews arrived not long after. Jamie's mom told her that Peter had been pronounced dead at the scene, and they barely got her out in time. As if all that wasn't enough, among Peter's belongings was a diamond ring. Jamie knew he'd been planning to propose to her on the trip. She wasn't supposed to know, but Peter had been awful at hiding things. She'd overheard him talking to one of his friends about it just before they left, and she remembered being really excited for the chance to say yes whenever he finally did it. Instead of a wedding, however, she found herself dressed in black and standing at his grave. She'd somehow managed to escape the accident with no lasting injuries, and had only been in the hospital a couple of weeks before being released. Peter's body had been in pretty bad shape, leading to a closed casket funeral. Jamie wasn't sure what to expect from Peter's family, as she'd only met them once, but they welcomed her with hugs and tears as they all mourned together. Once everything was over and Peter was laid to rest, Jamie went back home to Ohio and tried to get back some semblance of a normal life. She moved back in with her parents for a few weeks, but ultimately found a job in Columbus and moved into an apartment with one of the friends that she went to college with. As much as she tried to bury the accident and put on a happy face, however, she found herself plagued with dreams about it. Most of them were flashes of moments, with the sound of metal grinding against rock and wood intertwined with Peter's screams. Sometimes she could even hear him begging her to help him, to free him. She hadn't wanted to know the details from the accident report, but she had heard the doctor telling her parents that Peter had been crushed as his side of the car landed on a boulder. She was just inches away from the same fate, and if the car had only moved a few inches, she wouldn't be alive. With the help of a therapist, she slowly worked through the trauma, unpacking memories that she didn't even know she had from that night. As time went on, it became easier to talk about it, and she found the dreams becoming fewer and farther between. Peter's voice became a thing that she would only hear on rare occasions, and she stopped blaming herself so much for his death. A year and a half passed as she worked to navigate life without him, and she was even starting to think about trying to date again. Life seemed to be moving on when she got the first call. It was late, nearly midnight, when her phone rang on the bedside table. It took her a moment to wake up enough to realize what she was hearing, but she finally shook off enough sleep to grab the handset off the hook and put the phone to her ear. "Hello?" Her sleepy voice broke through the darkness. "I can't live without you. Please come back to me." Her eyes shot wide as she sat straight up in bed. "Who the hell is this? How did you get this number?" Her trembling voice begged. "Oh, Jamie." The silence on the other end of the line was excruciating. She knew what she'd heard, but it couldn't have been. She clicked on the lamp, flooding the room with light. Someone was playing a cruel prank on her. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she dialed the number of her therapist. He told her to call any time, day or night, and she needed someone to talk to tell her that she wasn't going insane, more than anything else at the moment. He picked up on the third ring, and she told him what had happened. His first thought was that maybe she just had a very vivid dream, but she knew that couldn't be the case. He managed to help her calm down, offering to meet her the next day at his office, and they finally ended the call. She didn't sleep anymore that night, staring at the phone for hours, wondering if he'd call back. But only silence filled the room between her sobs. Everything she'd worked to move past over the last 18 months had come flooding back in one night. By the time she met with her therapist, Dr. Friedlander, in person the next day, she was much more open to the idea of the call being a dream. He told her how the mind can sometimes create sounds and make people think they're seeing or hearing things that don't exist. It wasn't completely reassuring, but she felt better thinking that she'd imagined the whole thing. The next couple of nights were filled with anxiety, wondering if the phone would ring again. It took a few uninterrupted nights, but she started to feel secure once more, and after a week, she was sleeping through the night just like before. Just as she'd started to accept the incident as a fluke, however, she found herself being awoken once more by her phone ringing around midnight. She wasn't as quick to pick it up as she'd been the first time, but her hand finally found the button and she answered. Putting it slowly up to her ear, she hesitated. Hello? Please come back to me, Jamie. You're all I have. His voice was even clearer than before. Leave me alone. Whoever you are, this isn't funny, she screamed, slamming the phone back on the hook. This time, she spent the rest of the night crying in the living room. She didn't want to hear that it was all in her head, and she didn't even want to use a phone. Someone was playing the cruelest prank that they could on her, and she just wanted it to end. The rising sun brought her some semblance of peace, but another call that night brought her back down to reality. She didn't answer it that time, and after about 6 rings, it stopped. That would become the new normal over the next few days, with sleep coming easier and easier as she learned to ignore the calls. She wouldn't let some monster ruin her life. She tried unplugging the phone before bedtime one night, hoping that it would allow her some peace as she slept, but it didn't work. The phone rang like normal, and she found that it had been plugged back in when she checked the following morning. As odd as that was, she kept pushing on with her life. Day after day, night after night, the ringing became so normal that she even ignored it when it started happening in the day. Phones at work would ring when they shouldn't. Payphones would ring as she walked by. She even had a store clerk tell her that she had a call one day when the phone rang while she was getting gas. She ignored them all. One day, after 3 or 4 months of daily calls, she found herself sleeping peacefully through an entire night. As odd as that was, the next day was also call-free. It seemed that whoever had been trying to call had finally given up. Ecstatic to finally have some peace, she tried to resume her normal life, but something felt off. It wasn't just the calls that had stopped. Everything around her seemed muted in some way. Colors weren't as bright. She could barely hear people talking to her, and the whole world just seemed to be dying around her. One night, she found herself in a dream for the first time in a long time. This dream, however, wasn't like any of the others she'd had about Peter. He was there, of course, but he was talking to a doctor. Her parents were there too, but she couldn't tell what was going on. It was like she was floating above them, looking down as they discussed something very serious. Then she was looking up from what she assumed was a bed. They were all there, standing around her. Her mom was crying, her dad and Peter were talking to the doctor, and she was looking around. No one noticed at first, then her mom looked down at her through tears. "She's awake!" They all scrambled, the doctor calling for a nurse, and her dad and Peter talking so fast she could barely understand a single word. A light was being shown in her eyes, and she had to close them to avoid being blinded. Just before she woke up, she remembered hearing a male voice speaking. "It looks like it was just an involuntary response. We can keep monitoring, but the chances of her coming back are near zero at this point." She didn't know what to make of the whole thing, and even her therapist said it was just her brain trying to make sense of everything that had happened since the accident, and especially with the calls over the past few weeks. He thought that maybe her mind was torn because she'd thought of moving on from Peter, and the guilt of that was eating away at her. As the next few months flew by, it was almost like the crash had never happened. Once or twice, she even forgot the name of the person that she was in the car with. Though the world continued to fade, she barely noticed it anymore. Everything had always been black and white, and no one needed to speak to her at all for any reason at any time. Years later, as she was drifting off to sleep in a room she barely recognized, an old voice that she thought that she knew from somewhere spoke to her through the darkness. "I'll always love you. I wish you could have found your way back, and I'm sorry for everything." As her eyes closed, the sound of a phone ringing filled the air one last time, and she drifted off into nothingness.